Next month, one of my best friends will turn 60 years old. And at the moment the calendar page turns to her birth date, she will retire. How is that possible? On Friday, our elected leaders in Washington, D.C., chose to avoid their responsibilities to provide for the common good and let the budget clock run out. Why would they do that? Today, a pastor friend is presiding at the funeral of a young man who, for unknown reasons, has taken his own life. What was that child thinking? Retirement before the age of 80, which is my personal goal. Shameless betrayal of those who trust you. A life cut short. Some things just don't follow. Grammarians call such not following a non sequitur. For example, they say it might rain tonight. It must be 2 o'clock. What? Our lives, though not sentences, sometimes they feel that way, our lives are as punctuated by non sequiturs as is our speech. Some things just don't follow. Mark goes wading in the non sequitur pool this morning with 3 seemingly unrelated stories. First, we learn that John the Baptizer has been arrested. Next, we hear Jesus' first sermon, repent and believe in the good news. And third, Jesus goes strolling on the beach. What could these 3 things possibly have to do with each other? We have to remember that Mark is the oldest and the shortest of the 4 Gospels. He is the first person at the scene of the crime, his report unvarnished and terse. He moves the action in his gospel forward with the word immediately 20 times in 16 chapters. Later gospel writers will expand the stories and interpret and massage them for the sake of their own audiences. But Mark just tells them. He wastes no words. He offers no explanations. So though it seems to us that Mark might have been writing under the influence of suddenly legal cannabis, in fact, he has a method. John the Baptizer was arrested for telling the truth about the king who was multiply married, publicly unfaithful, and absolutely unrepentant. When John called him on it, the king threw John in jail. What's the connection to the next sentence? Imagine how Jesus felt when he learned that John the Baptizer, who had been very public, who was well loved and respected, had been thrown into prison. Jesus realized this was no game they were playing. The stakes were high, and they didn't have all the time in the world. How are these stories connected? John spoke truth to power. Jesus claimed authority over all earthly rulers. Their words and actions would not go unnoticed. There would be consequences. And if you remember how John the Baptizer's story ends, you know what I mean when I say that his was only the first head to roll. Mark's fast-paced story is not random, but urgent. John is in jail. Jesus has thrown down the gospel gauntlet, and he has to get out in the world and do something. Boom, boom, boom. Actually, there is a 4th, seemingly unrelated story tucked into these 7 verses. As Jesus walked along the beach, he called out to fishermen. Whether he had called others before them and they turned away, we don't know. But he called out to Simon and Andrew, James and John, follow me. And without a single question like, follow you where? Or who are you? 4 strong young men dropped their careers, left their families to trot down the beach after Jesus. Some things just don't follow. But some people do. When my pastoral colleague told me about the death of the young man in his congregation, the college freshman, who after a great Christmas break with family and friends went back to school and ended his life, I was immediately thrown back to a similar tragedy in our small circle of friends. Valentine's Day will mark the 5th anniversary of dear Douglas's death, a vibrant young man who showed no signs of angst or illness, kissed his girlfriend at the end of a Valentine's Day date, went back to his dorm, and didn't wake up the next morning. His parents are guarded about the circumstances of his death, but we know that it came at his own hand. Douglas's birth had been a surprise to his parents long after they thought they were able to have more children. So though they love all their children, this little tag-along boy was a joy they never imagined and never took for granted. So in a world of things that don't follow, in a world of non sequiturs, there is none greater than this, a much-loved child whom love could not protect. Some things just don't follow, but some people do. Douglas's parents are deeply faithful. And if there is such a thing as a model disciple, they are it. They are kind, they are courageous, they are generous, they live disciplined lives, they are forgiving, they are honest, they are selfless. They are everything I would desire to be as both a disciple, a spouse, and a parent. But Douglas's death buckled their knees and nearly stopped their hearts. 5 years on, what do we say? Long ago, my friends had decided to follow Jesus. Through sun and storm, through joy and sorrow, through wealth and poverty, through life and through death. So in that darkest hour of their lives, they continued to follow, clinging always to God and to each other and to we who love them. As some of you know from your own painful experience, the sorrow of Douglas's death will never leave them. But they also know that God will never leave them either. And so they follow, even when things in their lives don't. So why did Simon and Andrew, James and John drop everything to follow Jesus? We can speculate, but we cannot know for sure. Did they hate fishing and would have followed the first guy who offered them a better option? Was it something about Jesus that caught their attention? Maybe they'd heard about him and were prepared when they saw him coming toward them on the beach. We don't know. And it really doesn't matter. Because rarely do things in our lives follow logically one after another. In fact, in my own humble experience, most of the very best and the very worst moments of my life have come out of the blue, unexpected and unexplainable. My life, like yours, is filled with non sequiturs of the highest order. But even when things don't follow, we do. We follow Jesus wherever he leads.